the late night crew. To start, I go to school in Boston. For privacy reasons, I'm not going to include the name of the school, but if anyone reading this also goes here, I think you'll be able to figure it out. So at the end of the spring semester last year, one of the dorm buildings on campus was closed for renovations. Since then, construction crews have been constantly working on completely stripping the building and redoing it entirely. Lately, it's become a bit of an issue because the dorm I'm living in right now is right next to it, so residents are often woken up very early in the morning to the work being done. In response, the school set up a meeting for students to voice their concerns to the project manager and members of the administration here. Obviously, nothing can be done to stop the construction. They just want to make it look like they care and are trying to do something about it. I'll get back to this later. Anyways, on a few occasions, I've seen workers doing work right outside my window. There's probably like a 20-foot gap between my room and a part of the building having all the construction being done, so I have a really clear view of anyone out there. If my window's open, I can also hear them talking. I never really thought too much of it. I expected to see people there. The weird thing is that sometimes the workers show up really late, like between the hours of 12:30 a.m. and 2 a.m. late. I usually notice because I'll see flashlights moving outside my window and hear the door that leads onto the roof opening and shutting. At first, I was a little weirded out by it. Why would they need to be up there that late? As it continued, though, I just started ignoring it because I figured it was just some late night crew or security that went up to make sure nothing was out of place. As I very recently found out, though, that is not the case. About a week ago, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. Suddenly, a brief flash lit up the room. I looked around for a minute and then it happened again. I looked out the window and realized it was just the workers walking around the roof with flashlights. I ignored them and tried to fall asleep. Before I could even close my eyes, though, I heard a conversation ensue. "He's sleeping," a deep voice said. "Yeah, looks like it," responded another voice. "Tonight?" asked the first voice. No, let's wait a little longer," said the second voice. "Whatever you say," said the first voice. Soon after, I heard the door shut and peeked out the window to see both of them had left. I stayed frozen in my bed for a while, wondering if they had been talking about me. I eventually told myself that they were talking about a friend of theirs or something, and I had nothing to worry about. I closed my eyes and fell asleep. When I woke up, I was still a little worried, so I asked my roommates if they've ever seen or heard those guys out there. Both of them thought I was joking, but I assured them I was very serious. Both said they had no idea what I was talking about. They didn't come back for another week, but before I saw them again, I decided to attend the sit-down the school had set up. When it was my turn to speak, I asked about the late night crew. I wanted to know why they were up there so late and if it was entirely necessary, as it was preventing me from getting a full night's rest. The project manager just stared at me for a minute. "Late night crew?" he asked. "Yeah, the guys who come up there sometimes really late and just kind of walk around with flashlights," I responded. He stared at me for another minute or so. "We don't have a late night crew," he said in a quiet voice. No one said anything. Everyone was just staring at me. Finally, someone from the administration said that it was maybe homeless people who had found a way up to the roof and were using it as shelter, and that they would keep a better eye on the entrances to the building at night. There are a lot of impoverished individuals in the area, so it sort of made sense. The only part that I was still confused about was that the people aren't staying up there all night, but just for 5 to 10 minutes. I decided not to mention that part. That was 2 days ago. I didn't see anyone that night, but last night is a different story. Same as usual. I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard the door open again. This time, though, there were no flashlights. Very slowly, I strained my neck to get a look out the window while still remaining hidden. I saw 2 figures standing on the roof, facing my window. Nothing happened for about 30 seconds, and then one of them said something. I recognized the 2 voices as the ones from before. Their conversation went a little like this. "Did you get that email from Bill? Bill is the project manager." "Yeah, looks like this isn't gonna work out, huh?" "Guess not. You think he's listening right now?" "It's possible. Are you? Can you hear us, buddy? Are you listening?" At this point, my heart was practically beating through my chest. I didn't know how to react. I just stayed in the same position, completely frozen, hoping they would just leave. "Cut it out. We really shouldn't be up here much longer." "What? I'm just messing around." "But yeah, you're right. Looks like this is goodbye, bud. Don't worry, though. We'll be seeing you around." After a brief moment of neither of them speaking, they both turned to the door and walked away. I didn't sleep much last night because of that. I don't really know how to handle something like this, and if I should bring it up with the school again. Based on what they said, though, it seems like they won't be around anymore. Still, though, these guys know where I live. I can only hope they haven't seen my face, but I think I'll be avoiding the construction area for a while. Creepy old man. I tried to post this a couple days ago, but messed up on formatting. Quick background. This took place when I was about 8 years old. My mom would drop me off at my babysitter's house every morning before school. Then the babysitter would pick me up after school and watch me with 2 or 3 other kids until my grandma picked me up after work. My mom was taking night classes at the time. So, one morning my mom had dropped me off at my babysitter's house. She was a very tall, old woman with snow white hair. She honestly reminded me of an owl. Most mornings she would leave the lights off for me in the living room so I could sit on the couch, close my eyes, and rest before we left for school. This particular morning I wasn't super tired, so I just sat in the dark on the couch and just closed my eyes. I usually stayed within the perimeters of just the living room and the bathroom, which was the first door when you entered the hallway of the rest of the house. I knew my babysitter lived with her husband, her daughter, and granddaughter, but I never really saw them much. All I knew was that her husband was very sick and recently had surgery. For what? I didn't know. Anyways, as I was sitting on the couch with my eyes closed, I heard slow footsteps coming down the hall towards the living room. I didn't think much of it, just figured someone had to use the bathroom. But they actually walked all the way into the entryway of the living room. It was pretty dark. The only light was from the window that had the current drawn almost all the way down. A short, wide figure stood in the hallway. As this person came closer, I realized it was her husband. He was in only boxers and socks. You could see that he had some sort of open chest heart surgery. He had staples going down his chest. I have never spoke to this man or had much interaction with him. He walks over, sits down next to me. No space between us whatsoever. He's breathing heavily, like the kind of breathing you would hear if a stalker was trying to mess with you on the phone. And he puts his hand high up my thigh and just sat there. I was frozen, solid, sweating bullets. I had no idea what the heck was going on, or why he felt comfortable sitting in the dark with an 8-year-old he barely knew, or why he thought putting his hand inappropriately on my thigh was acceptable. We literally sat there in silence, other than his breathing. Finally, he got up and just slowly walked back into the hall. I just remember feeling off that day and confused. When I told my mom about it that night, she totally freaked out, called the babysitter. I don't remember what she said, but my mom immediately found a replacement babysitter. Not the creepiest or craziest story, but I definitely never forgot how weird I felt. So, creepy old man, let's not meet again. Although at this point you are probably dead.
Can I buy your dog?
I don't know if this is the right material for this sub, but I guess it was kind of odd. I was going to In-N-Out with my family and we decided to bring my dog. He was bred as kind of a show dog, a German Shepherd, but we got him to alert us for intruders. so kind of utility, but he is a pretty good looking dog, as his parents were award winners, plus we took care of him. We couldn't leave him inside the car, as it was a sunny day, so my dad stood for a while with him outside. My dad, dog, brother, and I were staying outside as my mom ordered inside. While we were waiting, there were a couple of people that passed by and looked at our dog. The usual. Who doesn't love dogs? However, there was this one woman, and I assumed husband, that lingered around us. The look of the husband was kind of normal, but this woman was an odd one. She had scraggly hair, kind of, and was stout, probably mid-40s. She approached us and immediately began showering us with, "Aw, he's so cute, looks so nice," things like that. Then, with a joking tone, asked, "Can I buy him?" Me and my dad laughed and he said, "No, but sometimes I wish. What a troublemaker." Then it got kind of odd. "His ear is down. May I ask where you got him?" My dad complied and they shared information about his weight, where we got him, what breeder, but then she pressed again, "Can I have him?" We kind of nervously laughed again. This was 5 minutes, kinda long for someone who doesn't have a dog to make them stick around, but it was fine. Then she started to bend down and talk to my dog, ignoring us and speaking with that mushy, "Aw, I wish I could just take you home." We looked at this woman who did this stroking for a good 15 seconds, and then she stood up once more and pressed, "Is he for sale?" My dad answered with a quick no, and by now me and my brother were awkwardly standing around while this woman lost her joking tone and was pressing insistently to buy our dog. Sure, he was of purebred quality, and maybe she was a breeder or avid dog fan, but this went on for what seemed like hours. My mom finally came with the food, and we said, bye, with a tone that was rushed, and we hurried back to the car. Again, this is a little soft for this, but maybe, lady, if you happen to be seeing this obscure internet post, then let's not meet.
Can you take a look at this? Is this blood?
This happened a few years ago and it still confuses the hell out of me. So I'm out at the movies one night with my father and his friends. They were pretty big guys. Think tough, drunk, and Irish. The theater was one of those multiplexes in a gigantic shopping mall plaza, but it was 10 p.m. in the middle of the week, so the lot was pretty vacant. To pass the time before the movie started, we walked around to the much more secluded side entrance, where movie patrons usually exit a theater to smoke cigarettes and talk loudly. We were just shooting the shit when a boy, couldn't have been much older than 10 years old, approached us by himself. "Excuse me, can you take a look at something for me?" He looked really scared. As someone who had previously suffered from a slight panic disorder, I could sort of sense the fear in his eyes, the way he was wringing his hands, the way he was insistent, etc. Now, my dad and his friend, they weren't ones for empathy, so they took one look at the kid and said something like, "What do you want?" But I said, "Sure." He walks me around the corner of the building, and the whole time I'm acutely aware of how bizarre this whole thing is. As we round the corner, I notice that, thankfully, my dad and his friend are tailing, albeit at a distance. The boy leads me to another side of the building, and there stands a disheveled middle-aged man beside the spotlight in the ground. I don't know how best to describe it, kind of like a pool light, but really bright. On top of the light is a bright red substance that looks to be just paint. The boy looks at me panicked. "Is that blood?" he asks. My father and his friend are now there. They gruffly reply, "No, that's not blood," before stumbling off back towards where we were originally standing. I don't know why I did, but I stayed behind, and he pressed me. "Please, just look at it." This kid was having some sort of freak out, and I said, "No, that doesn't look like blood to me. I think that's just paint. Maybe there was some work here and they spilled some on the light." I'm legitimately trying to calm the kid down because the situation is kind of sad to me. The kid isn't biting. "No, please, look at it." At this point, I turn to the man he was with, thinking this has to be embarrassing to him. I try and convey, "Some night, huh?" with a shrug, and he just smiles at me, like a weird smile. I don't know how to describe it. Kind of dopey, with eyes that weren't all there. Whatever it was, it set off a serious red alarm in my head, and I started to back away. "Can you look at it, please?" Seriously, I wish this was an exaggeration. He was really insistent that I look at it again and again. So as I'm backing away, I calmly say to the kid, "Why don't you ask your father there? I'm sure he knows what it is." Then all the panic left his voice and he said, "He's not my father." I look at the man again and he's still giving me this fucking smile. I told the kid one last time not to worry about it and walked back over to my father and his friend, seriously creeped out. They, however, didn't seem to care at all and just sort of brushed it off as if it was nothing. To this day, I have no idea what the hell that was about, and I worry that the kid was trying to alert me to something with that guy. At first I thought they were from a group home or something, but that didn't make any sense because the kid seemed lucid, and who the hell lets adults out with kids at this hour of the night from a group home? Where was the aide? I then thought, okay, what if the kid was special needs and the guy was his aide? Well, that went out the window because the kid, while acting really, really strange, didn't seem to be mentally challenged. And if the guy was the aide, why the hell wasn't he getting involved? Would love some theories on this.
he knew my name.
So a few people asked me to post another of my stories from my time working private security and the let's not meet moments I had. This happened about 2 years ago. It's the last and final private security gig I've had. It's also what made me say fuck it and join my dad up in the Pacific Northwest. So I worked out in Beverly Hills, California. I was a guard at a luxury community. This place was the creme de la creme. They had strict policies in place as far as security went. That didn't stop paparazzi or other strange folk from trying to get in, but we would more often than not cut them off at the knees. There was no less than 4 of us on patrol at any given time, 2 at the guard shack watching the folks entering, and 2 running patrol in a golf cart. One night we were short-staffed. There was just myself and Big D. D was huge. He was a former bouncer and had one time been a bodyguard for Britney Spears. He had to use the restroom, so he decided to go on patrol and then run by the clubhouse to use the facility. So I'm chilling in the guard shack, which was actually a pretty nice little office, when our phone rings. Now the only people that could call into us were residents or someone calling from the clubhouse or pool area. I answer and nothing, just heavy breathing. I look to see who is calling. It's the clubhouse. I think it's D fucking around. I tell him to go fuck himself and hang up. Few minutes go by and I'm flipping through my manga. Phone rings again. Clubhouse. I answer it and tell D to finish his shit and come back. Heavy breathing and then a raspy voice. That's not nice, Nate. It's not D, because I see him coming back in the golf cart. Now I'm petrified who the fuck is calling. The voice creepily giggles and then hangs up. I toss my manga and fly out the door. I tell D what happened and how the dude knew my name. D thinks I'm fucking around because we often play jokes on each other, and he says he will go check it out. I tell him he better call our boss, but he rolls his eyes and tells me he will be right back. Besides, he never got to use the restroom. So I go back into the shack and I try to calm down, and the phone rings. I don't want to answer it, but I do. It's more heavy breathing. I had enough. I called our boss, who bitched about it, but came down. D, meanwhile, gets back and the dude looks like he saw a ghost. He tells us he's in the restroom in the clubhouse and someone comes in as he is going to the bathroom. They don't say anything, just heavy breathing. They get into the stall next to him, and just as he is flushing, he looks up and some man wearing a mask covering his eyes and most of his face is just staring at him with the most peculiar grin. D screams as he pulls on his pants and the guy books it. Our boss wrote it off as a teenager playing a prank. He wouldn't let us call the cops. He said it must be a resident who knows my name as we do wear badges. I wanted to quit, but I didn't that night. But the next weekend I'm at work. D is in the booth with me and we are talking about the Lakers game when the phone rings. D answers it and says it's for you. I take it thinking who would ask for me, and I answer, nothing for a second, then that horrible breathing. I look at D, and then the phone. I hang up. We tell the other two guards to stay there, and we take off for the clubhouse. We get there and it's quiet, start going through the game room, and then the kitchen, and we peek into both bathrooms and nothing. Then we get radioed that one of the others saw a figure jumping over the wall. The walls were pretty high, and they said he or she scaled it with no problem. We call the cops as we are supposed to do if someone gets in, and they come and sweep the area. Meanwhile, one of my coworkers finds a notebook outside the clubhouse, like it fell out of someone's pocket. It was one of those small lined notebooks with the pages that tear out. In it, someone had written not only my full name, but every security officer that worked there's name and our home address. After learning that, I quit. I was making good money and I liked my coworkers, but knowing he or she knew my name and where I lived made my decision to quit and move up to where my dad lived much easier. From what I've heard from D and former coworkers, they only heard from Heavy Breathing Man one more time, but it was enough that 3 more of them quit, including D. My former boss and the police think it was a former coworker, but they haven't figured out who or if it was. So whoever you are, let's not meet ever. Names have been changed.
Creepy guy in the shadows.
This happened literally 20 minutes ago. I live in a small town and frequently walk the back roads to a store about a quarter-mile away without incident. I could take the main roads, but there's much more traffic and I prefer the quietness of the back roads. Tonight, as I was making my way to the store, I was nearing the darkest point on the street when I heard a rustling in the bushes. It's usually just rabbits or a fox, but I pulled out my pocket knife just in case it was a stray dog or something that might attack me out of fear. No sooner did I reach for my knife, I hear footsteps quickly closing in on me. As I was approaching the street I needed to turn left on, I looked behind me to check for traffic and caught a glimpse of a tall man walk running in my direction. I'm a small female. I quickly crossed the street onto one with much more light, and dude did an about face turn and ran in the other direction. I wasn't even as scared about possibly having to defend myself in that moment as I was about if I had been 5 steps slower without my knife in hand. Knowing my kids were expecting me back home in less than 10 minutes, what would have happened? I definitely walked the main road back home. Now, I always make sure that if I am walking alone at night, to always have a knife in my hand inside my jacket pocket. Creepy dude in the shadows. Let's never meet.
Creepy first date.
This is the first time I have ever posted in Let's Not Meet. I keep reading all these dating horror stories, and it being Valentine's Day and all, it had me recall a nearly forgotten first date with a guy my friend Mark fixed me up with. I had known the guy a little because he worked with my friend at a local music store. He seemed cool and he was actually pretty good looking. The first time we had met was at an ICP concert that we had all attended. The guy, who we will call Mike, was pretty normal on the surface, and through Mark got my number and called me. We went out on a date, and as the night drew on, he asked if I minded if we just go hang out at the local park and chat, because we had been at a super busy, loud bar that had a band playing. I was 19 and highly stupid back then, so I agreed to it. It was in the summer and wasn't yet dark, so I was thinking it seemed weird. As we're just chatting, he leans in and kisses me, and I look around realizing it had gotten really dark. I'm in heaven because at this point he hasn't given me any reason to think he's a creeper. We had a great night. He was charming and funny, and we had a ton in common. Then, after our first kiss, he gets this creepy grin. He looks out the window, then says to me, "I'm taking you in those woods and we are going to have a really good time." I kinda laughed a bit nervously because at the time I hadn't yet lost my virginity. I tell him I'd rather just stay in the car. He gets weird and angry, and it's like he's two people. Why can't we just go into the woods? I promise I won't rape and kill you. By now he's trying to laugh it off, but I had gotten incredibly creeped out. I try to play it off like I'm not ready to run away. I should have been more creeped out than I was, but I was so naive. It creeps me out now writing this. He looks at me again and leans back in his seat and begins to start fake whining. "Oh, come on, let me just take you into the woods. It will be fun." I'm having none of this and start getting mad, and I tell him I'm ready to go home. I finally talk him into just taking me home. He was oddly quiet the rest of the drive home, and then as he gets to my house, he proceeds to apologize profusely about it. I heard later from my friend Mark that he said I was a tease. When I told my friend about what happened, he stopped talking to Mike. Said that he had heard he can be kind of a sex maniac. How about borderline psycho? So, guy I went on a creepy first date with, let's never meet again.
You're a really heavy sleeper.
I'm a 36-year-old woman. When I was 26, I went through a life-altering, hope-crushing, has anyone seen my will to live kind of breakup. To save you from reading paragraphs of heartbreak, I will sum it up by saying that it would be more than 3 years before I got into another serious relationship, and that I probably would not have survived if my precious toddler girl hadn't needed her mama. About 2 months after the aforementioned breakup, some female friends invited me to the very large, old, and beautiful house that the two of them rented for a 4th of July bonfire and cookout. When I arrived at the house, they told me that they had invited a guy friend who they wanted me to meet. I had seen his picture on one of their MySpace friends lists and commented that he was cute at some point before, but they promised there was no pressure. I was, after all, mostly still a raw and tragic mess at this point. In any case, the guy friend arrived and we were introduced. While he was not as cute as his profile picture, he was funny and easy to talk to. Besides, I wasn't looking for anything, so whatever. I then learned that he was quite taken with how gorgeous I was, even though he chose to tell me that he had been, in his words, nervous because I could tell looking at your profile picture that you have huge upper arms and I thought you might be a beast. He was quite the charmer, obviously. We hung out that night, and when he asked for my number, I gave it to him because he seemed decent enough as a person. Fast forward 2 weeks or so, we've talked a little through text and instant messenger and have hung out with our group of mutual friends a handful of times. I make it very clear that I'm in no fit state for a relationship and that I can't go there if that's what he's after. He says he understands, but that he enjoys my company. Fair enough. One night, after we've been out with our group at our usual bar restaurant, I agree to go back to his place with him. We hang out, have sex like consenting adults, and go to sleep. No big deal. The next morning, we're just hanging out and chatting a bit before I have to head home. At some point, he says, "You know, you're a really heavy sleeper." My initial reaction is to chuckle and agree that, yes, I sleep like the dead, before I catch something sort of odd in his tone that I can't put my finger on. I say, "Wait, what do you mean?" He stumbles over his words a little and says, "Oh, I just honestly thought you were pretending to be asleep because you were making these little noises like you were enjoying yourself." I felt like someone had poured ice water down my spine and was speechless for a moment before I said, "What did you do to me?" He blanched at my tone and quickly said, "Nothing, really. I mean, once I realized you were really asleep, I stopped." He refused to elaborate on that statement, but I felt absolutely sickened. In the months following this, he would text me obsessively, send me messages on MySpace at all hours of the night telling me things like, "Have fun getting laid, cunt." Apparently, this all stemmed from his inability to understand why I didn't want to be his girlfriend or see him anymore. He started flirting with my friends in an attempt to make me jealous, and even started trying to chat up the 15-year-old sister of my best friend, except that his flirtation devolved into saying he hated her because she reminded him of me. In the end, his batshit behavior only stopped when one of my friends, who he said was disgusting because she was so overweight, but that she had pretty eyes, responded positively to his advances. They're still married, as far as I know. I contacted him about 5 years ago wanting to apologize for any pain I might have caused him. He ended up making inappropriate comments on my Facebook pictures in the middle of the night and picking weird, petty fights with my fiance in the comments. Even though he is married to a psychiatrist, his actions made it abundantly clear that growth and rational behavior still aren't his strong suits. I now live 700 miles away from where I first met him. I moved back to my hometown 2 years ago. Unfortunately, I learned about a year ago that he now lives in the same state. Thinking about him still makes my skin crawl. I live in fear of him realizing that I'm a relatively short drive away, and I hope on all that is sacred that we never meet again.
I was falsely accused.
This happened when I was either 17 or 18. I was technically the creep in this situation, even though I never meant any harm. Before I begin this story, I need to point out that I have a few minor mental disabilities, so sometimes I can't read a situation for what it is until it's too late. God knows I've suffered for that multiple times in my life. Anyway, I used to work at a grocery store. It was rather large, so I had quite a few coworkers I barely knew. One day I was working a rush when I saw a woman talking to one of my coworkers, who I'll just call Mike. They seemed to know each other rather well, and I could have sworn I recognized her from one of the departments, so I assumed she was a coworker on maternity leave. The reason I say maternity leave is because she was holding a baby boy who looked like he was just a few weeks old. Anyway, the woman came to my register to ring up her groceries when she was done talking to Mike. I greeted the woman with a smile and asked her the typical questions like, "How are you?" or "Do you want this in a bag?" I looked at the baby she was still cradling. I've always been good at taking care of kids and have helped out at camps, daycares, and regular babysitting jobs countless times in the past. So I asked the typical questions about her baby as well, like, "What's his name?" and "How old is he?" When I finished ringing her up, I told her to have a good day, and that was that. I later found out from Mike that she wasn't a coworker at all, just a regular at the store. I figured that was okay. There were a lot of those, several of which I knew, and she seemed nice enough. I saw her shopping with her family quite often after that, and, like with every regular I knew, I always offered a smile and a wave when I saw them. One Saturday, I had just finished my shift and was walking out the door to my car when my mom called me and asked me to pick up some hot dogs. They were all the way at the back of the store and I was at the front, but I rolled my eyes and began to walk back the way I had came. I cut through one of the aisles to get there faster, and I came across a group of 4 people taking up the entire aisle. I recognized them as the woman and her family. I didn't want to bother them, so I tried my best to walk around them, but they were going incredibly slow, and no matter what direction I tried to go, I couldn't get around them. Looking back, I probably should have just turned around and walked through a different aisle, but I got to the hot dogs before that even crossed my mind. The family resumed walking, and I got the hot dogs, paid for them, and left the store. I worked again the next day, and of course, the woman and her family came to shop again. I smiled and waved like always and continued to work. About 20 minutes later, my manager asked if he could talk to me. I didn't think much of it, thinking he just needed my help with cleaning the bathrooms or something, and I followed him to the back room. When we got there, my supervisor was there too, and I was instantly confused and nervous. To make a long story short, they told me that a woman had reported me for stalking her and trying to hurt her baby. I still remember feeling like I had just been slapped in the face, as I knew instantly who they were talking about, even though I had never laid a hand on the woman or her baby. I explained my side of the situation, also making sure to mention the events of the day before when I was shopping. Luckily, I had known both my manager and the supervisor ever since I had started working at the store, so they believed me and chalked it up to the woman simply misreading the situation. The rest of that day, I felt like I was going to throw up. I had come close to losing my job and had been accused of being a criminal, and I was technically still a kid. Even though I had been assured by my managers and later my parents that I had done nothing wrong, I still spent a good few months after that constantly fearing that someone else with a baby would think of me in that way, to the point where I couldn't even look at another child. I've since gotten over those feelings, but over the years I've learned to be more careful with what I say or do. Luckily, for the rest of the time I worked in that store, I never saw that woman or her family again.
Sassy ass.
I've had many creepy encounters, but this particular situation I actually feared for my life. This happened like 16 years ago. Oh my god, I'm old. I was maybe 13, but I looked older. I developed early, so I had a nice figure and assets, to put things politely. I had beautiful, long hair, clear skin, and I'm 5'10". Being as young as I was, and fairly sheltered, I wasn't aware of how appealing my features may be to some. I lived in a large apartment building with my family right off of Main Street in my city, a short skip from anywhere, really, including the grocery store. This particular day, my mom asked if I didn't mind walking to the store to grab a few items to complete dinner. I was happy to go on a short walk. It was summertime, so I was wearing a thin strapped tank top and shorts. Nothing immodest, but it didn't hide my figure, although there is no attire that qualifies as an invitation for this type of attention. To get to the grocery store, I could walk all the way around on the sidewalk of this busy street, crossing through intersections, or I could take a shortcut that would take me through the train station, across the street from my building, over the train tracks that ran between the station and behind the shopping plaza where the market was. I would just round the building until I'd be in front of the plaza. In my young mind, this seemed the better, safer route. The fact that I'd be alone and out of sight only momentarily never crossed my mind. Pretty much as soon as I stepped inside, I felt a glare blaring into me. I turned to see a man who was at least in his early 20s staring at me with a stupid smile. I ignored him and began grabbing the few items I needed to get. I noticed that he was following me down some of the same aisles as I shopped, but I saw him exit while I was checking out, so I didn't think any more of it. I had to walk the entire length of the plaza to the other end before I'd have to round the corner and cross the tracks. Just as I turned the corner out of sight, a car pulls up next to me. There are two men inside, one of which was the creeper who followed me around inside of the store. He says, "Hey girl, wanna ride?" I ignore them and keep walking. "We can give you a ride, maybe have some fun." I had no idea what to do. I firmly said, "No," to which he replied, "Don't be a dumb bitch." I never stopped walking, but I didn't know what to do. At this point, the passenger opens the door, which was on the opposite side from me. So I said, "No, why would I ever want to go with you?" At this point, the passenger closes his door and says, "Forget it, man. We don't want to deal with her sassy ass." And they peel out, talking to each other about what a pain in the ass I'd end up being. I ran home crying like any 13-year-old girl would do, and I never crossed those train tracks or walked anywhere again until we moved.
I used to live in this house.
I used to live in a beautiful yellow house on the East Coast with my family. My father moved us around a lot as kids, but at the time that I was around 12 or 13, we were fixing to move into this one. It was an old house, almost a century old. There was a lot of manual labor to be done before we could bring our belongings over. My grandmother owned a home right down the street, a massive 6-bedroom, and she let us sleep there while we did the work necessary to get our house ready. The yellow house was naked and ugly on the inside. So far, the focus had been gutting the basement and getting rid of all the 70s wallpaper and shag carpet. All we brought over so far was some cutlery for impromptu meals and fix-up supplies. It gave off a creepy vibe. The previous owner, an older woman, had died in the home due to her age. The realtor was obligated to tell us that when we bought it. I was 13 or maybe 12. I'm not sure. Either way, I was a bit behind the curve on self confidence. I had, and still have now at 20, a massive anxiety problem. I got a twinge of discomfort when my mother told me, "Baby, stay here for a little bit. I have to bring your brother to your grandmother's. The doors are all locked. Just lock the front one behind me." I'm not sure how long it took for what happened to happen between then and my mother leaving. It had to have been 20 minutes or so. My grandmother wasn't very far, but my mother loved to talk, so the simplest visit could take upwards of an hour. I was in the kitchen when a man drove into my driveway, used the key to get into my front door, and walked in. He was about mid-40s, but possibly younger and with shit hygiene. A huge head of curly brown hair and a long beard, and wearing a getup of cargo shorts and a blue Hawaiian shirt. I don't remember his shoes, but then I wasn't really looking at the ground. I was, however, looking like a deer in the headlights. I'll never forget the words he said first. "Oh, it's okay. My grandma used to live here. You look so afraid. It's okay." He was inching into the apartment slowly. With some quick thinking, I grabbed a little knife from our cutlery drawer and hid it behind my back, praying I wouldn't have to use it. I didn't know how to use it. "This is my house now. You can't be in here." He was ignoring me. "Just over there is where we kept the Christmas tree," he said, pointing towards the living room. "And that's a hell of a stove. I used to cook all the time on that stove." Still getting closer into the home, inch by inch. I wanted to cry. I wanted to pull out my phone and call my mom to come back. I wanted my mom to pull into the driveway and fix it. I flashed the knife. "Get out or I'm calling the police." He put his hands up like a surrender and backed out the way he came, facing me the entire time. "Thanks for your time," he said as he walked out the door. I burst into tears as he drove off, unsure of what even really happened. I called my mom, and she, of course, flipped out and got home within 5 minutes. I don't know if the guy was actually an old resident of the house. He had a key after all, related to the woman who passed, or a mixture of both with pedophilic intentions. Either way, creepy Hawaiian shirt guy. Let's not meet.
Banging in the wee hours.
Thanks to various circumstances, this last weekend was my first home alone weekend in 6 months, and as it turned out, I'd A, partially forgotten how to handle it, and B, had been reading way too many creepy stories. making going to bed a bit scarier than normal. Since I sleep with my door open, I have a clear view of the hallway and part of the stairs, which end right by the front door. If my bedroom were in the front of the house, my head would be almost directly above the front door. So it's nearing 2 a.m. on Sunday morning. I'm finally in bed, having stayed up late watching TV. My older cat is somewhere downstairs, and my younger cat has just hopped up next to me and gotten comfortable. I'm just drifting off to sleep when I hear a bang on the front door. My first thought is that someone is trying to break in, followed by, what if they need help? Then logic kicks in and I realize that I live at the end of a cul-de-sac in a quiet neighborhood. Too rural for someone to be looking for an escape from the cops or a mugger, and definitely too urban for car trouble, which leaves an attempted break-in. I've just managed to convince myself that it was a dream when I hear another bang, bang, bang. My older cat comes racing into my room, and at this point I'm as stiff as a board, going, "Oh God, I'm home alone. Someone's trying to break in. I'm screwed." There's a cat and creaky floorboards between me and the nearest weapon, and I've got a badly balanced door and several more feet of very noisy floorboards to get past just to get to the top of the stairs. In short, I'm alone, defenseless, and scared out of my mind. And then, nothing. For the rest of the night, I fell asleep eventually and dragged myself out of bed 8 hours later. My mom gets home a bit after 4, and I say nothing, too focused on getting the last of my chores done so I can go take a nap. I still haven't told her what happened 2 nights ago. It wasn't the first time someone's tried to get inside when I was the only one awake to hear it. It probably won't be the last, but it was by far the loudest and possibly the scariest. Update: I told my mom the day after I posted this, at the urging of several commenters.
Riding my bicicleta.
This is when I was 18 and lived in Aurora, Illinois. Anyone who has lived there can verify that there is a bike trail that crosses right through the city, running from east to west, with a bridge crossing the river. A lot of the trail is surrounded by trees to give the illusion of being in a forest. Near the bridge on the west side of the city, there is a homeless shelter called the Hasid House. I used to live on the west side when I was in high school, but after I graduated, I moved to the east side because of the cheaper cost of living. The friends that didn't go to college lived on the west side, so I would ride my bike through the trails to get across the city. One day I spend most of the day on the west side at a friend's house smoking weed, drinking beer, and playing cards. I didn't leave until around 12:30 a.m. Now on my way toward the east side, I had to cross a very spooky underpass, then pass next to the homeless shelter, and finally crossed the bridge. Right before I was going to cross the underpass, I stopped and then I thought for a second. Here I am, super duper high. It's almost 1 in the morning, and I'm about to cross this really shady area of the trail. I had to decide either go through the trail or backtrack and take to the streets, which would extend my bike ride an extra 15 to 20 minutes. I remember thinking to myself, fuck it, it's not like I'm in Chicago. And I started riding towards the underpass. As soon as I entered the underpass, I smelt it. Crack. Before my parents' divorce, my dad used to smoke crack, and I always knew when he smoked it because of that tangy, ink-like smell. I didn't even think or stop. I just started riding as fast as I could through the underpass, and when I came out on the other side, I looked toward to my right, and for a brief moment, time stopped. I saw two figures turn and face me. They were squatting in the bushes. They turned as if I had caught them off guard because they were huddled together, but I just rode my bike with all my might. I looked behind me again and saw that they were chasing me, trying to run me off my bike. I've been mugged before when I lived in Chicago, but the fact that they looked like shadowed figures in the dark made it 10 times more horrifying. I could hear them grunting and panting as they tried to catch up to me. The trees covered all the streetlights and I was going extremely fast. I was afraid I'd run myself off the trail and they'd grab a hold of me. As I headed toward the bridge, and I thought I was home free, but then I felt a rock smash against my shoulder. They started throwing rocks at me. The adrenaline was coursing through my veins. I had never felt so alive and in the moment. I passed that bridge so fast and got to a main road before I finally slowed down and looked back. I remember my shoulder blade pulsing in agony. I was afraid they had broken a bone or something. I squinted my eyes, and after a good 30 seconds, I saw the figures on the other side of the bridge. There were actually 3 of them, and they looked exhausted. They stared at me from across the bridge before finally receding back into the darkness. I rode the rest of the way home as fast as I could, and when I checked my back in the mirror, I had a bruise that encompassed my shoulder blade, and it swelled up so bad I couldn't move my arm for 3 days. Probably the most horrifying experience of my life. I'm pretty sure they were homeless men staying at the homeless shelter, and they were getting high on the trail. I'm sure that they started tweaking when they saw me.
Chubby Chaser.
So I'm a bigger girl, 5'11" and a bit of a chunky monkey. I'm not obese or overly fat, but I have a few rolls from the bakery. I was in a pub I always go to, on Brog, Cork City, Ireland, if anyone knows it, and I was with a bunch of my friends. We are all girls and we are having a laugh. It was like 10:30 p.m. I had like 2 pints and was starting to get a buzz. I was standing by a door out to the smoking area when a guy passed behind me and touched me. Now, I am a person who hovers a hand behind people if I am cutting through a crowd. I tap them lightly on the back if they don't see me trying to cut through, and I always say, "Sorry there, just coming through." I usually get the, "Oh, sorry," and they move. So, when I felt a hand on my waist and back, I thought this guy was just brushing past and putting a hand there to say excuse me. I turned and looked to see if I was majorly blocking the way to the door. That's when things got weird. This guy squeezed my waist, like half pinching my waist. I'm like, he's drunk. But he continues past me out to the smoking area, and I see he is fine. No dazed look or walking funny. So the night goes on and I get squeezed/pinched 2 more times by the same guy. I come to the conclusion that he's kind of feeling me up. He's not touching my ass or anywhere else, just my waist. It's like he's testing it, feeling how hard or soft it is. He comes out of nowhere and does it, and then he's gone before I can turn around and confront him. I realize a few things after that second squeeze. He is alone and basically circling me and my friends, coming near our group, then looping back out to the smoking area. I clearly know what he looks like by the third squeeze. I catch him out of the corner of my eye and I'd move, especially after the second squeeze because it showed me he knew what he was doing and he was targeting me. Out of his way or get another body between me and him. My body language is, "Stop touching me. I'm not reacting to what you're doing. Fuck off." I don't tell my friends because I don't want to ruin the night. I am also the tallest of the group, and I stopped drinking the minute the second squeeze and lurking happened. It would be a different thing if he was doing it to the smallest or drunkest girl in the group. He can't just pick me up and carry me away. Lights come on and it's home time. In hindsight, I should have told the manager at the time. He's a friend of mine, and he would have let us stay behind for a few minutes and let that guy wander off, but I was with a group of 5 to 6 girls, and they all grabbed their stuff and we were out in a second. If you know the pub in the area of Cork City, we ended up outside Hillbillies/The Fountain. If you don't know, we literally came out of this place and turned right, crossed a road, and were in this big open space. I stood by the taxi rank and was stoic and not talking and laughing like my friends were. Why? Because the guy had followed us on his own out to this area. Usually, this place is flooded with people on a night out, but that night it was dead quiet. He didn't walk on away. He stood hovering. I'm by the taxi rank, and he's a good 20 to 30 feet away by Hillbillies, a fast food place. I decide to tell my friends that he has been following us and he has been touching me. My friends turn to look, and of course, they all go over and start talking to him. I stay by the taxi rank and would happily jump into a taxi on my own and leave them there, then go over and entertain him. He's far away, but I can tell he's staring at me. One of my friends comes back and is like, "What's wrong?" They obviously weren't listening when I told them about him. I tell her the story and she is like, "Oh Christ, okay." The rest of the gang come back. They are pretty drunk, and one of my friends is like, "He's up from Cary for college, and he invited us back to his house for a house party." I go, no, he's a creep, and I have to retell the story. He is still hovering over across the way, and he's just staring. I managed to stop my friends actually confronting him and get them into a taxi, and home we went. When I got home, I got into a scalding hot shower. I actually had red marks on my waist from his hands. That's how hard he was squeezing. I don't know if he would have come up to me if I was on my own, or if he thought I was drunk because of how my friends were. Turns out I'm not easy prey. I have had lads look at me weird while I'm out, but nobody has ever put their hands on me or kept up things when I obviously am not interested. Keep an eye out when you're out, lads and lassies. You never know if a chubby chaser is on your tail.